This is the Speedo manufacturing plant, northwest of Sydney. Yeah, they were basically told in a stand-up meeting that 60 odd people on the factory floor were going to be let go that morning.
Yeah.
Because they're moving to Vietnam. I think this was going back 20 odd years ago, right?
Yeah.
I was an intern psych at the time, and you got to see a whole bunch of reactions from people, right, when that happened. And I think that was the first time I really got to see mental toughness in action. I didn't know it was mental toughness, right, at the time. I didn't have that terminology. But certain people were, they broke down into tears. Some people were catatonic, they were frozen from the shock. Yeah. Some people were, throwing chairs around, out of anger and frustration, right? And so, look, I think it always fascinated me, working with people, particularly when they were losing, their jobs, right? And that's how I got into the psychology piece, was really through outplacement, career transition, and that work. Because I felt that there was a lot of humanity that was missing when that separation process took place, right? When someone's asked to leave an organization, I mean, we see this with all the tech firms now, right? Some of them are being told via text message and email, right, that they're no longer required, right, within the business. There is a deeply dehumanizing experience that takes place, right? And you are typically at your lowest point professionally when something like that happens, right? And I wanted to help people. I didn't want people to feel that they were at their lowest point. In fact, I wanted them to see the opposite, which was, right, you're actually not meant to be here. There's something else for you. We need to find out through some sort of structure how you're going to get to a better place, right? And so that was exciting, right? And we had to turn the mindset of people around. And so I think that part for me, was a wonderful part of, becoming a psychologist, was realizing how powerful the mind could be in the worst situations that a person might have had to deal with, right? Professionally. So I think that extended itself to many things, in the world of work, but also, when we set up Compass, 10 years ago, leaving the corporate world, the safety, right, of the corporate world, or the perceived safety of the corporate world, was a big risk. And I remember that first 12 months, was probably the most stressful, for me. And I needed to really start applying a lot of my own principles, right, that you tell other people about to yourself, which is always much more challenging. And it wasn't until, mate, I got to that thinking of what is the greater purpose, right? What am I actually trying to give to my clients? What am I trying to give, to the team, to my family? Those were much more important conversations I needed to have. Right. And I think when I started having that more regularly with myself, things started to fall into place.
I think what we were talking about with dealing with people, and potentially having that lack of trust in bringing employees on, but also understanding that people are going to support you. They're going to help you scale your business as well. A lot of people can have that attachment to their business. But often I think that's the limiting factor in growth. And then we can apply that like metaphorically to some of the principles of your teachings and what we've just spoken about. So from the business growing itself, but also you as a person, was that something where you learnt on the go and had to apply a lot of these principles that you had learnt in your own reflections, but also in terms of growing Compass?
Yeah, I think, life is the best teacher, right? And so, there's a whole bunch of stuff that it lands differently when it's happening to you.
Yeah.
And I think that is the biggest thing for me, right? And so I think, going through the experience of setting up a business, and particularly a business, it wasn't here in Australia, right, where it's a lot more comfortable, procedures are established, you've got a track record and history of doing things. We set it up in Dubai, right, in the Middle East, in a free zone, in a place where, you don't have necessarily the support, right, that you might have in a place like Australia. And so I think a lot of those things, you needed to build a tribe, a group of people around you very quickly, right, that you could trust.
Yeah.
And you also needed to learn. You needed to gather as much information and knowledge as quickly as possible and be open to that. And it was super uncomfortable, right, through that process. And I think, you know, we go through moments, right, where you feel comfortable,
Yep.
and then something gets thrown at you that makes you feel uncomfortable, right? And it's kind of that cycle,
Yeah.
and that continues.
Yeah, and so I guess going through that process, like when you reflect back on your key learnings, teachings,
Mm.
what was your biggest hurdle and your biggest success? And what have you learnt from those?
Mm. I would say the biggest hurdle was definitely myself,
Yeah.
right? It was definitely the fear of failure for me. And I think that fear of failure held me back from taking risks,
Right.
from talking to different kinds of associates, looking at how we expand into different countries, you know, what kind of partnerships that we wanted to develop. All of those things held me back, right, for the longest time, because I didn't know how to do them. It was the first time, right, that I was learning how to do it. And so I think in a lot of ways, that was the biggest hurdle, is realizing that just because I don't know how to do something doesn't mean that that's not the right thing for me to do for the business, right? That I shouldn't be equating those two things together. I think the biggest lesson for me was letting go, right? And actually trusting other people around me, you know, to kind of get things done.
Kind of like what we
And
were talking about before.
yeah, that was a big factor for me. I think um, this is something that I traditionally have never been very good at,
Yeah.
right? On a personal level, is kind of just letting
Relinquishing.
go and trusting that other people will actually have your best interests also at heart. Not all the time, right? They've got their own lives and they've got other things they need to do. But to leave yourself open to that, right? Because I think growing up as a young kid, that wasn't always the case, right? The values were very much around, you need to protect yourself, you need to make sure you're going to be okay. And no one was there to, you know, to cover your back in case anything happens. These are all just conversations happening in my head, right? And we talked about, you know, thoughts affect feelings,
Yes.
feelings affect behavior, right?
And 80 to the Stanford study where
Yeah, 82% of the things you worry about never happens,
right.
right? And so all this energy is spent on things that, you know, you could be spending on things that are in your control, right? And I think that was what the purpose of that study was, to show that you don't actually control a lot of the future like you think you do, right? And so you need to step back from that, and worrying, being so anxious about the future, and saying, what can I do today that is going to influence positively, you know, the outcomes that are going to take place.